This is The Chris Berry Show. Expert information on wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
Welcome to The Chris Berry Show. Hopefully you had a great week. I'd like to start the show every week off the same way, sharing a positive focus. Something positive that happened in the previous week. And I actually have two. The first one is that Forbes, so if you've heard of Forbes magazine, I was named to the Forbes Financial Council, which means that you'll be, in addition to listening to me on the radio or on podcast, you also might see me online at Forbes.com, sharing basically a lot of the things that I share with the listeners on a weekly basis. So again, just keeping with that goal of trying to get the education out there. Then the other positive focus is one of our team members just had her work anniversary. So she's been with us for the longest. So she's one of our youngest employees, but also one of our most veteran employees as well. So it's great that Shelby's been with us now for a good period of time, and we appreciate her. So it was great to have those things happening in this previous week. Looking forward to next week. Really excited. We have a workshop at our Brighton office this Thursday. I think there might be one or two spots left. But if you are interested in that, please give us a call at 810-355-2584. You do have to RSVP, or if you want a list of our upcoming workshops, you can also give us a call. I think the following week, the 24th, we're going to be at our Ann Arbor location in the evening. That's at 6 p.m. on Thursday, the 24th, at our Ann Arbor location. So if you want to ask questions live and in person, please feel free to attend those workshops. They're free. We call them clarity building workshops because it really helps build clarity around the issues affecting us as we get near retirement age or in retirement. So now this week on the show, what I'd like to do is I'm going to cover, first of all, in our second segment, I'm going to go over how to overhaul your portfolio in 7 days. So I'm going to give you 7 steps. Think of it as one thing you can do each day to overhaul your portfolio in 2019. So things to think about as it relates to your investments, which obviously with the market volatility and the ups and downs, that's on everyone's mind right now. So I thought it would be important to go over that. In this first segment, I want to cover some money moves for 2019, some things to think about moving forward in 2019. Listen to our last show. We covered it was kind of a week in review or a year in review of 2018. A couple things looking forward to in 2019. But what I'm going to do is just focus on two things, two strategies I think that make sense from a finance standpoint in 2019. And then the third segment of the show, get into listeners' questions and answers. So if you do have any questions, you can email us anytime at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com, or you can give us a call at 810-355-2584. And you can always go to the website, thechrisberryshow.com, where there's a contact form. So some things to think about for 2019. I think the big thing is to understand that this bull run that we've had, now it might be time to consider the volatility. So, and I've had this conversation with clients, but the consideration, especially if you're getting near retirement or at retirement age, might be a time to think about making sure that you're comfortable with the volatility in your investments in your accounts. So everything was rosy as the market continued to rise, but now that we've suffered some volatility, and that volatility might continue in 2019, according to a lot of reports, it might be a time to consider how much volatility you're really willing to take on, especially as you near retirement. And I think it really depends on which stage you are in your life. And whether you're just starting out, maybe you're just starting working, maybe you're near retirement, or maybe you are already retired, and how that volatility affects you. And then the second thing, and I'll talk more about that, but then the second thing, or second opportunity really for 2019 from a financial standpoint is going to be with regards to taxes and income tax. So we've talked about it previously on this program, But we're going to, a lot of people think that taxes have to go up. And in fact, that's the way the law currently is. So given the fact that the law says that we're going to revert back to the prior tax structure in 2025, let alone whatever happens in 2020, then understand that there's a tax play that could be made, and we're potentially running out of time for this tax play, especially depending on what happens in 2020 with the president's situation. So right now, if you have tax-deferred accounts, think of your IRAs and your 401ks, 403bs, that money that's pre-tax, you haven't paid any income tax on it. Well, keep in mind, you have to pay tax on it at some point. And right now, income tax rates are at a historical low. And it's going to be like this at least until 2025 unless something happens in 2020. So the opportunity here is to think about maybe paying the tax sooner rather than later, especially if you think taxes are going to go up more than just reverting back to their pre-2018 levels. For example, right now, we're at one of the lowest historical marginal tax rates ever in the history of the U.S., of us having income tax. For example, if you look back, right now our highest marginal tax rate is 37%, and you have to make over $600,000 married filing jointly to reach that 37%. But that's the highest marginal tax rate right now is 37%, but it's been way higher in history. For example, if you've heard of Ronald Reagan, our president, and what was he doing before he was president? He was an actor. Well, guess what? When he was an actor, marginal tax rates were as high as 94%. So effectively, if he made two movies, brought in $200,000 in 1 year, then 94% of his income would go to the federal government. And if you look back historically, the highest marginal tax rates have always been during periods of conflict. World War II, Korea, 60, 70%. And then even now, we're in conflict. And so you couple that with so we're at a low historical marginal tax rate. Then you couple that with the amount of debt that we have. So in 2018, we crossed over, and now we're $21 trillion in debt. And that's something that has to be paid off at some point, right? So the play then, and especially I think in 2019, this is going to make a lot of sense, given that 2020 we're going to have a presidential election, and we're not sure what's going to happen and whether our current tax code will remain unchanged through 2025. And this is something that we were talking to clients last year about even as well, is to look to move money from those tax-deferred accounts. So if you have an IRA, 401k, maybe it makes sense to pay the income tax sooner rather than later. And I'm not saying that it has to be done all at once or that you have to go for a Roth, which is a good option, but just do an analysis to figure out if it makes sense to pay some of that income tax. Because think of it like this. That money that you have in that IRA, that $400,000, that $500,000, you don't have all that money. You can't spend it all. You like that, seeing that big number, but understand that you basically have a mortgage on that account, and that mortgage has to be paid off before you get access to your funds. And not only is it a mortgage, but it's an adjustable rate mortgage. So when we give our workshops, a lot of times I ask people if they have a mortgage, and maybe a couple of hands will go up. And then I ask if they have an adjustable rate mortgage, and no one's hand, almost always everyone's hand goes down. Occasionally there'll be people that have adjustable rate mortgages, but many people have shied away from the adjustable rate mortgages because of the unknown, because of the volatility of the rate. Well, similarly, with your tax-deferred accounts, your IRAs and 401ks, you basically have an adjustable rate mortgage on those. And you don't know when they're going to adjust the rates back up, but you know that they've just adjusted the rates down. So by deferring to paying the income tax, you're potentially paying more tax in the long run, but also you're deferring when that tax calculation is going to happen. And so the government has been nice enough to give us a very favorable, at least for the next year, a favorable tax rate. And I think in the future, well, I don't think, I know, because that's the way the law is currently written, those rates are going to go up. So doesn't it make sense to pay the income tax sooner rather than later? And then based on that, understand there's some couple different options of what you can do with that money. One opportunity would be to do a Roth conversion, where you move that money into a Roth account, or you could move it into, if you're looking at concerned about long-term care costs, you could move that money into an asset protection trust so it could be protected. But just think about having that analysis of paying the tax sooner rather than later, with the understanding that taxes are going to go up. And the reason why I think that's very important for 2019 is a couple of reasons. First, the law is scheduled to go up in 2025. So taxes are scheduled to go back up in 2025. So if you're looking at doing moving money over a period of time, we only have about 6 years left where we can do these conversions or paying the tax now before the rates increase to their previous higher rates. So that's the first reason. Then the second reason is with 2020 coming along and presidential elections coming up, we don't know if this current tax law will run its course of being able to reach its sunset of 2025. Because that's the way that it's currently written, is that it's supposed to revert back in 2025. But we're unsure of whether, if there is a new president in 2020, whether that will remain or not. Another reason looking at this tax play makes sense is because of the current market volatility. With accounts being down, let's say you had maybe $300,000 in your IRA, and now that that's dropped down to, let's say, $250,000, now would be the time to pay the tax because the account is down. So you'd be paying less tax. So it seems like a perfect storm of reasons why it makes sense to do an analysis of how much tax you should pay. And then that becomes a question in itself, is how much tax should you pay? Should you pay all of the tax on the IRA? Maybe a portion, maybe some, maybe none. And it's very important, especially if you're going to move this money into Roths, that you pick the right number. And I wouldn't suggest that you necessarily do it all at once now, but it's going to be important that you leave some wiggle room, because you can't do Roth recharacterizations anymore, where you say you put in too much and then maybe you put it back inside of an IRA. They don't let you have that do-over. That's part of that new tax plan. So one of the things that I recommend, and we did this with our clients, is especially near the end of the year, kind of do put together a rough idea or pro forma of how much tax or income you think you're going to have in the year. And then what you do is you look to the brackets. So how much space do I have between where I am now versus if I were to do a Roth conversion or take that money out of the IRA before it bumps me up into the next tax bracket. And you might look at the tax brackets, and you might want to even bump up into the next tax bracket depending on where you're falling. For example, going from 10% tax to 12% marginal tax rate, it's only a difference of 2%, and that's not that big of a deal. But if you're going from 12% to, say, 22%, then maybe you're going to look a little bit differently at paying the tax sooner rather than later. So that's a big opportunity, I think, in 2019, and especially now with the market downturn we've just faced, is to look at paying the income tax sooner rather than later. And that's going to be different for everybody, but it's one of the things that we help our clients. We can run what we call a tax map, where based on previous year's taxes, as well as what you think it's going to look like in 2019, we can figure out how much maybe it makes sense to move in a year. So if that's something you want assistance with, give us a call. 810-355-2584. And then getting back to the first point for something to look forward to in 2019, a lot of the experts, and I've been doing a lot of research myself, point to 2019, the market's being very volatile. It's like a roller coaster. So we've had this up that's been coming, but now we have a little bit of a bump. And a lot of experts are predicting that 2019 potentially could be a little bit bumpy with some ups and downs in there. But that's one of the things, that the market's always going to do what the market's going to do. So as long as you've had your money invested properly with the proper time horizons, with the proper volatility tolerance built in, you should be okay. You should understand that the market's going to go up and down. It's just how do we take that money out, or how do we utilize that money? And hopefully, with this down market, it's opportunity for us to do things like pay the income tax sooner rather than later. But you can be in a difficult spot if you're forced to sell your positions. Things like RMDs can be potentially painful during times like this. But hopefully, you've put together a plan that will help you weather the storm. And that's what's important is having a plan. And if you want to take the first step in maybe putting together your plan, then I recommend you attend one of our free workshops. And again, we offer them about once a week at one of our different locations. We have one coming up in Brighton this Thursday at 6 p.m. And then also we have one the following week as well at our Ann Arbor office. So if you want information on that, give us a call at 810-355-2584. And then join me as I continue talking in the second segment. We're going to cover the how to overhaul your portfolio in 7 days. So with the start of 2019, a lot of people are looking at their finances or their legal planning with a fresh set of eyes. So what I wanted to do is give you seven steps, something you can do one day each week to look at making sure your portfolio is right for you. It's still a right fit for you. And then in our third segment, what we're going to do is we're going to get into their questions and answers. So questions from our listeners. I'm going to pick a few of those questions and read them on air and then provide some guidance and some answers. So if you do have a question that you want us to tackle, give us a call at 810-355-2584, or you can email us anytime at askchris@The Chris Berry Show. Again, ask Chris at The Chris Berry Show. And then join me as we continue to talk about investments, and we're going to talk about overhauling your portfolio in 7 days. So join me after the break.
The cost of care for an elderly loved one or a loved one with a chronic illness is shockingly expensive. If you are dealing with the unbelievable cost of care, make sure you get all the benefits you're entitled to. Here's certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton.
Most of my clients are really concerned about long-term care costs. They don't know where to turn, and what we can do is put together legal strategies to protect your resources and also bring in additional resources to help pay that cost of care. One of the things that they often say is that I wish I knew about this years prior. And unfortunately, the information's out there, but there's just so few certified elder law attorneys. As the only certified elder law attorney in Livingston County, it's my job to make sure that our seniors, our loved ones, our veterans have the best quality of care possible and the best quality of life possible.
Protect your hard-earned assets from probate, long-term care costs, and the IRS. The Elder Care Firm will get you the governmental benefits you deserve, including veterans benefits and Medicaid. Visit theeldercarefirm.com and schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation. That's theeldercarefirm.com.
Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. So, previous segment, we talked about money moves for 2019, making sure that your volatility is properly aligned, and then also the opportunity for paying the taxes sooner rather than later. Now, what I want to do is go over 7 steps or how to overhaul your portfolio in 7 days. So think of it as this might be your New Year resolution. So maybe your New Year resolution was take a look at the investments. So I want to give you 7 things to think about, 7 steps to overhaul your portfolio. So the first thing is to take stock of where you're at. So you need to understand what you have, where you're at, how these things fit together. So one of the things we do with our clients is we give them the opportunity to put together an asset mind map, basically a one-page financial plan where you can look at it and see all of your assets laid out so that you understand where everything is at, and where it's supposed to be going. It's surprising. I sit down with clients and they don't have a full understanding of where their investments are at. But so take stock, understand what you have. And then from there, the next step is to pick the right mix. So pick the right mix of investments based on your volatility. So how much risk are you willing to take on? And there's different ways that we can offset risk, whether it's bonds or annuities or less volatile mutual funds. There's a lot of different options here. And everyone's kind of risk number is a little bit different. And we have a tool where you can calculate how much risk you're willing to take on based on your portfolio by answering a couple easy questions. And it's a free resource that we offer to our clients, and I offer it to the listeners of The Chris Berry Show. If you go to riskscorenow.com, you can input it'll ask you a couple questions. You can fill out a couple answers, and you can get a good risk score, what your risk profile is. So first step is to take stock, understand what you have, and understand how you're doing in the past. So it's not enough to just understand what you have, but also take a look at how the performance has been. Has it been up to snuff? Are you happy with it? And too often people only remember their winners. They forget about those losers. Kind of like you ask someone who went to Vegas and they only remember a lot of times the winning, and they're only going to tell you about the winning. So take honest stock. And then the second step, or in day 2, now that you understand what you have, moving forward, you have to figure out how much volatility you're willing to take on. And with the volatility, I think the past couple of weeks has really been exposing people that maybe they were taking on more risk than they really are willing to handle. So be honest with that, how much risk you're willing to take on. And we have that tool at RiskScore Now. Again, RiskScore Now, www.riskscorenow.com, that can help you identify how much risk you're truly willing to take on. And then understand once that you've taken stock, so you looked at past performance honestly, and now moving forward, you understand what your risk profile is. Then on day 3, or the third step, is to look at diversifying. So understand that having all your eggs in one basket probably doesn't make sense as it relates to retirement planning. Because let's say you have all your money in Enron stock. Well, what happens when Enron goes down? You lose all your money, even though it was in the market. And I have some clients I'm working with now heavily positioned in one stock. And if that stock goes down, that could have a dramatic effect on their retirement. So it's important to diversify, to spread things out a little bit. And diversification isn't really like having money at different banks. That's just talking about kind of FDIC insurance, nor is diversification relying on kind of different advisors or different investment professionals. Because understand that if you have multiple professionals, they might be putting together a plan, but if they don't see all of the assets, there might be some overlap in some of those funds. So it should be an overall diversification. So have things kind of big, small, foreign, U.S., the more diversified, the better off you might be, depending on your view of the markets. So my view is that the market's going to do what the market's going to do. Trying to pick stocks or hot sectors, that's a losing game because you're paying for additional fees. There's additional costs, typically, the more active you are. And I don't think anyone can really predict 100% what's going to happen in the market. So let the market do what it's going to do, diversify. So that's day 3, is the diversification. In day 4, or the fourth step, is to count costs. And this is probably one of the most important ones, or the ones that really drive my practice, is trying to minimize fees, minimize costs as much as possible. A lot of people are surprised when they see the expense ratios of these high-cost mutual funds at some of the wirehouses or the big banks, so to speak. And especially with the target funds, a lot of times there's a lot of costs or hidden fees or costs or expenses inside of those target funds, those target retirement funds. And there's different ways that you can look at or analyze those costs. But understand that if you're paying the active fund manager who's then paying, having you in mutual funds, understand you have fees upon fees wrapping up in there. And while during the nice bull market we had, those fees you might not really feel the effect of those fees, but with the volatility we're experiencing now, I think a lot more people, especially moving forward in 2019, should be a little bit more fee conscious with the expenses inside of some of their mutual funds. So day 4, think about the costs. So the first step, take stock, understand where you're at. The second step from there is to kind of figure out where you're at in terms of volatility. The third step is going to be diversifying. The fourth step will be managing the costs or counting costs. And then once you're there, the fifth step is going to be to find the correct funds that should be in your investment portfolio. So either do the research or work with a financial professional to figure out which are the right funds based on your volatility tolerance, based on the internal fees of these funds, and based on diversification. A lot of good funds out there. My goal, again, is to try to minimize fees as much as possible. So I think it's important to look for low fee, low expense funds out there, and there's some to be had. But that's the fifth step, is to find the appropriate funds. Make sure that you have the right mix based on your volatility tolerance and how much risk you're willing to take on. And then the sixth step is to check your target. So after you've put these things in place, make sure that you have the funds and that they're, once you kind of put them all together, that they're hitting the right numbers for you. And when I talk about kind of hitting the right target, first of all, it should fit into the diversification. It should fit into the asset risk volatility that you're comfortable with. But then also make sure that you have, when I talk about target, also I'm talking about the date. When do you plan on maybe withdrawing from these funds? Because that could play a big role as well, is having a time horizon for these investments. Is it going to be investments you're going to pull from sooner rather than later? If that's the case, then maybe the volatility should be toned down a little bit. Is it something that you're going to draw on maybe 5-10 years out? Then maybe you can take on a little bit more risk or volatility in those accounts. And this is where our approach of bucket planning comes into play with regards to financial planning. So we like to have a time horizon or target date for accessing kind of different investments. And we like to break it into what we call a now bucket, a soon bucket, and a later bucket. So the now bucket would be money that you have sitting around in checking savings that's liquid, safe. You can get access to it right away. And this is typically your income needs for the year. So if you're retired and you have to draw on your assets, that amount of income that you need should be safe, liquid, sitting in maybe checking, savings, money market. And then also you should have any planned expenses. So if you're planning on taking any big trips, that money should be safe and liquid and available. Or looking at fixing a roof or putting in a new water filtration system, that money should be safe, liquid, and available. And then you should also have in your now bucket whatever your emergency expenses are. So that amount of money that you want to have on hand that makes you feel comfortable, that helps you sleep at night. And that's not really what we're talking about with investment portfolio. That should all be just safe money that's sitting there. What we're talking about in target date is really the other two buckets of money. So most people have that later bucket of money that you're going to touch later, not necessarily in the first year. But then also we want to build in that soon bucket of money. And that soon bucket of money is the amount of money that you think you're going to need or have to utilize over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. So this is money that maybe has come out, maybe your required minimum distributions. So you remember once you turn 70 and a half, you have to start taking out RMDs. So the soon bucket should be invested more conservatively than that later bucket of money. And so this was money that maybe if you set things up properly, you weren't experiencing all the volatility of the last couple weeks or last month or so, because you have all this. You have your money in the soon bucket, the money that you're going to draw on sooner rather than later. Maybe it's invested less volatile, with less volatility than the money in that later bucket of money. And then, so having that target of what is going to be your portfolio, what is your asset mix for your soon bucket, along with that later bucket. So that other bucket of money, the money that you're going to need later rather than sooner, that should maybe have a different volatility mix associated with it. Maybe you're willing to take on more risk in that later bucket of money than you are in that sooner bucket of money. So our sixth step is to have a target date. So I would suggest 2 target dates. One, a soon bucket of money, and then second, a later bucket of money, making sure that you have diversification in there. But maybe you have different risk associated with each of those buckets. Because remember, with risk, that's where also return comes into play. So it's the 2 sides of the coin. Without taking on that risk, you're going to see a smaller return. And that's where, in our office, in our process, one of the things we walk our clients through is what's called the risk pyramid, where we help them understand just different asset classes and the different risks associated with these different asset classes. Okay, so our first step, if you remember, just to review before we get into the last step, our first step, if you remember, is to pick a mix. So have the right mix of investments, our first step, let me take a step back. Our first step is to take stock. So understand where you're at, take stock of what you've accomplished, what you've accumulated, take stock of how your portfolio has performed in the past. And be honest. Don't be like that gambler who only remembers the wins or tells people about the wins. Then the second step is to pick a mix. So figure out what your volatility tolerance is, and I would suggest that you figure that for a soon bucket as well as a later bucket of money. And then step 3, diversify. Make sure that you're diversified in your different assets. And I would look at diversifying assets as well as asset classes and not have everything in that stock. I have a lot of clients that have a lot of Ford stock, and I understand why. Working for Ford, they've accumulated it. But diversification should play a role in your retirement so that if something happens at that one company, you don't lose everything. You're not gambling just on that one company. And then the fourth step is to count costs. Look at the fees, look at the expense ratios inside of the mutual funds that you hold. Because the key things we can control is how much we pay out, and we can control when we pay taxes, but we can't control the market. And then fourth, find the appropriate funds. So you can do research, you can work with a professional, but find the right funds that should be part of your portfolio mix. And then next, the sixth step is to check your target. Make sure that we have the right targets set for our buckets of money to make sure that we have the appropriate volatility tolerance for our soon bucket as well as our later bucket, because it's not all managed the same. You're not going to just take all of the money out at once. Have some targets of when you're going to draw down on the different accounts, assuming you are. Because there's what we call it the money cycle. So you start off accumulating money, and then you have to look at how do you distribute that money. So it's important to have the right targets to understand when are you going to start taking that money out or distributing assets from those accounts. When are you going to have an income gap and need a draw on your assets? So have that target in mind as you're putting together your portfolio. And then be prepared is step 7. Just understand moving forward, there's going to be, depending on your portfolio, there are going to be ups and downs. For example, this past month or so erased a lot of the gains we had in 2018. And the market's going to go up and down, but don't stress out. As long as you have a good plan in place, just like anything, life's going to throw you curveballs. But if you have a good plan in place, you'll be able to weather that storm. So I suggest that is one of the things to do in January 2019. I wanted to lay out 7 steps to overhaul your portfolio. So very simple, take stock of where you're at. From there, understand what your volatility tolerance is, have the right mix of investments. From there, once you understand the mix of investments, diversify. So make sure that you're well spread out. Not all of your eggs are in one basket. And then minimize your fees. Minimize the fees as much as possible. Find the right funds. Check your target. Make sure you have the right mix in your different buckets, and then be prepared. So join me. Hopefully that was helpful. Join me in the next segment as we get into your questions and answers.
Certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton can help you protect your assets from the cost of long-term care, and they can also help you with estate planning, like they did for Linda Emerson.
I had to redo my will. It weighed on me that I hadn't changed it. I wanted to make everything easy for my daughter whenever I do keel over. But I went in, it was very professional, and sat down with Chris. I would definitely suggest him because he knows his stuff and he's not aggressive. He's, very friendly and makes you feel comfortable because I think he realizes it's not a comfortable thing for people. It was just an easy process. I came out of it and I told my daughter, "It's all yours, kiddo."
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800, 810-214-3800.
Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. Now, in our third segment, we're going to get into our questions and answers. So, questions submitted from our listeners. If you do have a question, you can email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com or give us a call at 810-355-2584. So, the first question is from Garrett. Do both trustees have to sign documents to transfer real estate from my mother's trust to a beneficiary afterwards? My mom passed away. She had a living trust with 4 homes in it. My sister and I are co-trustees. We've been left the 2 homes. I'm having a hard time getting my sister to do anything. Do I need her signature to quitclaim the deed, my 2 properties out of the living trust, or will my signature suffice? So, Garrett, looks like we have co-trustees, you and your sister isn't really holding up her end of the bargain. So, with this, questions with the trust, I always say that I really need to see the trust because the trust will dictate something very important, and that is how you and your sister serve as co-trustees. Because there's 3 different options on how you can handle the role of a trustee or really any of these roles of agency. So the first would be successors. So you could have successor trustees, and they could be consecutive, one after another. So it could be first you and then your sister. And that's typically how we see it. We see one person named as a trustee with the backup. Then the other option is co-trustees, and it looks like how you and your sister are. 2 of you are co-trustees. Now, with co-trustees, there's 2 options on how that could work. One would be co-trustees where both of you have to act. So it's Garrett and sister have to act. The other option would be co-trustees with independent authority to act. So that would be Garrett or the sister to be able to act. So that would be the key to understand whether both of you have to sign for the homes or just one of you would have to sign for that quitclaim deed. Now, that's just talking about who can legally sign. And also there might be provisions that says in the trust that if you're in agreement, it allows for only one signature. So that's just kind of the effect of signing. And that will be determined whether you're co-trustees with independent authority to act or co-trustees and both of you have to act, as well as whether there's a provision that allows for a single trustee to sign for both trustees. A lot of times it's done that way for convenience. So that's the basic answer to the basic question. Now there's a more complicated kind of underlining issue here, Garrett, is that if both you and your sister are trustees, that means both of you have to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries, of all of the beneficiaries. And then if there is disagreement, the trust will determine how that disagreement is handled, but potentially it might be a trip to court if the 2 of you can't work it out for the beneficiaries. So hopefully that works out. Hopefully that was helpful. But yeah, most likely both of you will have to sign unless it's co-trustees with independent authority to act, which is more uncommon than co-trustees where both of you have to act together. Now our second question, this is from Elaine. does your Social Security income change when you change residency to a different state? So Social Security, and we're going to do a show coming up on Social Security, so stay tuned for that. But Social Security income, does it change when you change states? The answer is no. Your Social Security will not change. Your Social Security is a federal program. Now, something that might change is taxes, because each state taxes Social Security a little bit differently. So that is something that might change, Elaine. Now, number 3. How should I balance my 401k options? And this is from Jeff. I have 19% of my paycheck invested in my 401k. 45% of it is invested in small stock investments, while 50% is invested in my company's guaranteed fund, which currently is at a 4.47% return. Should I move all the money investments in guaranteed fund, given the volatility of today's market? Well, Jeff, without knowing more, I can't give you specific advice on this, but a couple of things jump out at me. First of all, getting a guaranteed 4.47% return guaranteed, that's pretty darn good, to be honest. A lot better than some of the other things I've seen, better than having your money sitting in a checking account or savings account. So that's for sure. That's certainly appealing. And then with the market volatility, I never want to get into market timing, but I understand if the market goes down, it has to come back up at some point. So I have this great chart in my office, one of the research tools that shows just money moving in and out of the market and how people, when they're emotionally tied to the market, how much money is lost. And that human emotion is one of the biggest spend downs on people's retirement, is just trying to time the market. I don't think anyone can really time the market per se. So I don't want to get into a battle of projecting what's going to happen in the future. So is now time to move money into that fixed account? Well, I look at that rate of return, and that's pretty good for that fixed account. But I'm not sure if you should move all your money in, because what happens if the market keeps going back up? You're going to miss all of that upside. So you just took the hit on the downside, but you're going to miss the upside. That's different than what we talked about in our previous segment of moving money in this market downturn out of those retirement accounts, paying income tax now. It's a slightly different conversation than looking to move from volatility to safety. Jeff, what I would suggest is that if you have a plan, you stick with that plan. Now, you can always make adjustments, but just something to think about there. So hopefully that was helpful. Now, number 4, this is this is from Lisa. So my dad recently passed, and I'm the trustee of the trust. There are 4 beneficiaries. One of them is going through a divorce, and the other is applying for governmental benefits. How should I handle those distributions? Well, so I'm sorry for your loss. And the role of a trustee, it's a difficult role, as we saw from the first question, because you have responsibilities, and you have responsibilities and a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries. So, and just like the first question, I'm going to go back to you have to follow what the trust says. So the trust is an agreement, it's a contract, and you have to follow what the trust says. So and without reading the trust, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how that should be handled. But with a trust, depending on how the trust is drafted, there might be some opportunities to protect the beneficiaries. So first, if the trust was drafted with a special needs provision or a supplemental needs provision for that individual who is receiving governmental benefits, then what's going to happen is instead of an outright distribution, that money is going to be held in a special needs trust or supplemental needs trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. So the beneficiary would be entitled to their governmental benefits without being disqualified because of this special needs trust. The money would be held in trust. And so that means that governmental benefits would pay that base level of care and needs, and then there's pot of resources, whatever was left by your dad, could be used to improve that individual's quality of life. So hopefully there was a special needs provision either specifically built in for that individual, or a lot of times there will be basically a toggle provision where if someone is going to be or is receiving governmental benefits, then this toggle could switch into play, and instead of an outright distribution, a supplemental needs trust could be created for the benefit of that beneficiary. So that might be one way to protect that individual. And then also you mentioned that someone's going through a divorce. Understand that with the trust, you don't have to distribute the assets right away. In fact, it's typically not recommended to distribute the assets right away because, first of all, you want to make sure any final claims, expenses, taxes, you want to make sure all of that's paid out before you make distributions. Because once you make a distribution to an individual, it's hard to get that money back if there's additional bills that have to be paid. Good luck trying to get the money back in that situation. So you don't necessarily need to distribute the money right away, and if the divorce is going to be wrapped up relatively soon, then you can rely on that. Also, with the role of a trustee, one of the things that you should consider doing is publish notice to creditors. And what that publication to the notice to creditors does is gives them about 4 months. They have a 4-month window where if they don't submit information about a debt, then that debt would be barred if it's not submitted within those 4 months. So by publishing that notice to creditor, that starts a 4-year window where you could delay making a distribution for at least 4 months while you allow this publication to creditors provision to run. So that gives you a legitimate reason why to stretch out or hold the funds in the trust before making that distribution. And then also, depending on how the trust is worded, there might be what's called a spendthrift provision or provisions that say if there is an individual going through a divorce, a creditor action, bankruptcy, instead of distributing the outright, where now it's going to be lost in that action, instead it could be held in trust, almost like a toggle switch, similar to what we talked about for that supplemental needs individual, where instead of it going outright, as the base trust says, there could be a toggle provision built into the trust that allows the money going to that individual to be protected. So without reviewing the trust, I can't tell you exactly how that's handled, but hopefully those provisions were in there, and that gives you some flexibility with those distributions you're looking to make to your beneficiaries. Now, for our sixth question, our fifth question, who should I name as the beneficiary of my IRA or 401k? And this is from Elizabeth. Should it be my trust or my kids after my spouse? So there's a lot of confusion surrounding the use of trusts and retirement accounts, specifically qualified accounts. And so, depending on who you talk to, you're going to hear a lot of different things. But this is one of those things where there's different levels of knowledge. So I do this martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm sure you've heard me talk about it. And there's different belts associated with it, like a white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. And as a white belt, you know a lot less than a blue belt, and you know less than, obviously, a black belt. So similarly, there's different levels of knowledge with regards to planning for the second half of life. And so this is one of those things where you can kind of test your advisor, test your attorney if you want to. So with qualified accounts, there's and really we're talking about your IRAs or 401ks. Once you turn 70 and a half, you have to start taking out what's called required minimum distributions, meaning you have to start paying the income tax. And at age 70 and a half, you have to take out 3.65% of that account value once you reach 70 and a half. And then when you pass away, you can do what's called a spousal rollover if you're married, where you can leave it to your spouse. And now it becomes the surviving spouse's IRA. And if they were younger than, say, 70 and a half, it would be based on their life expectancy, so that they wouldn't have to pay out any RMDs until they reached 70 and a half themselves. So you can continue to defer paying taxes if that was your goal, which, like we talked about, may or may not be your goal in 2019 based on how taxes are looking. So you can do that spousal rollover. And then when the surviving spouse passes away and leaves it to the children, a couple things could happen. One, the children could pay all the income tax at once, basically cash out that IRA. Or the second option is we could stretch out that IRA. So you might have heard the term stretch IRA, where instead of paying all the tax at once, you stretch it out. And understand that when it becomes an inherited IRA, no matter what your age is, you have to take out required minimum distributions. So even if you're younger than 70 and a half, if you inherit an IRA, you have to pay those RMDs. And so at age 40, instead of it being 3.65% that you have to take out when you're 70 and a half, maybe at age 40, maybe it's 2%. And I'm just making that number up, but maybe it's 2%. So you still have to pay tax. Now, I would say a lot of people, the kids end up just taking all the money and paying the income tax because they want to get their hands on the money. But a lot of times it might make sense to stretch it out from a tax perspective, especially if it's a high income earner during their prime working years. Maybe it makes sense to defer paying taxes for those beneficiaries. Now, this is where the confusion happens. You talk to a lot of people at financial institutions or banks or even financial planners and even attorneys. You talk to them, and a lot of times they'll say not to name the trust as a beneficiary of the IRA. And in our office, we almost always name the trust the beneficiary of the IRA. So the reason they say not to name the trust beneficiary of the IRA is for two reasons. First of all, a lot of times the types of trusts people have don't offer asset protection for the kids. Too often I see trusts that say, I'll write to the kids at 25, 30, 35. Understand there's a better way to do it. You can build in the opportunity for a lifetime of asset protection for your children. And then the second reason is they're not quite understanding the rules surrounding trusts and IRAs, which is kind of scary because these are professionals. And so they think that if you name a trust as a beneficiary of an IRA, you can't stretch it out over the lifetime of the beneficiary. They think it destroys the stretch. Unfortunately, it does not. It still allows you to stretch it out over the lifetime of the beneficiary because the trust can I'm going to use a legal term, can qualify as a designated beneficiary as long as it's set up properly. So you can still see through and get that full stretch over the child's lifetime. And why this is super important is that this is the only way to protect those retirement accounts for the next generation. Because we had a Supreme Court case in 2014 called Clark versus Ramaker that said that if you inherit an IRA, it doesn't have the same level of asset protection as your IRA does, meaning it could be lost in a bankruptcy proceeding. So we almost always name the trust as a beneficiary of those IRAs, which goes contrary to many, again, white belt, blue belt, purple belt level planning out there. But that's the difference between a black belt and a purple belt or a blue belt or a white belt, is just that deep level of knowledge. So I should probably do a whole show on that, but hopefully that was helpful, Elizabeth. I thank everyone for those questions. I hope you make it a great week, and I look forward to talking to you next week on The Chris Berry Show. So make it a great week. Take care.
Learn more about Chris Berry and how he can help your family by visiting online at thechrisberryshow.com. That's thechrisberryshow.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 810-355-2584. That's 810-355-2584. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the elder care firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the C.J. Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.